Welcome to the show. If you're just joining us, this is Kenya's biggest conversation, the Situation Room, on this lovely second day of Sherehe Month 2021. We're going to have a conversation about coverage of next year's general election. And our guest is in the studio already. She is the acting editor for broadcast at Standard Group, Sophia Wanuna. Sophia, good morning.
Good morning, Eric.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
I'm so honored to be here.
No, we're
why
honored
has
to
it
have
taken
you.
so long?
We wonder.
We're also asking this question.
Traffic.
We're not sure. It's traffic, I mean.
It's
Traffic.
traffic,
For
yeah.
Mombasa
Traffic on
Road.
Mombasa Road.
Yeah.
Crazy. Happy to be here.
Karibu sana. Listen to today's proverb from City Muga.
Alimaye mtama havuni kunde.
Ati?
Alimaye mtama havuni kunde.
What is kunde?
Those mbogas. The healthy ones, you know? Those ones.
The green ones.
The green ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those ones.
Those ones, the green ones. The ones which are not beans.
The ones that are not beans.
Maybe I'm missing something.
Yeah, we had a whole conversation about this earlier.
Once
Trying
upon a
to-
time.
What is kunde in English?
There isn't an
Skuma wiki in English is kale.
kale, right?
We know. Okay. So
And
what
there's
is kun-
spinach.
Spinach
What's
is
spinach in
spinach.
Kiswahili?
Spinach.
Ni spinach.
Is spinach.
Spinachi.
Okay.
What is mchicha?
Almost sounds Italian.
Mchicha. Let's just say some of these words, you know, they agreed to share across language. So it's let's not complicate it.
So kunde is just kunde.
Kunde ni kunde tu.
Sawa.
Yeah.
Okay. Alimaye mtama
Havuni.
havuni kunde. What is mtama then?
It's that thing.
It is actually
Yeah, you know the one they peck on?
that one.
That one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is similar to sorghum, but isn't quite sorghum.
Yeah.
X.
The birds.
Yes.
The birds.
You too.
Mtama, they go like,
You
you
too.
know?
Okay.
They're on there.
You too.
Sawa sawa. First of all, congratulations on the launch of a new look, KTN News.
Thank you.
Tell us about that a bit.
Wow, that has been quite a journey for the entire team. As you know, the designers especially just coming together with a rationale on, okay, so we launched KTN News 6 years ago, the first 24 hours news channel in the country. And so coming to a point of, okay, we need to rejig this, a lot of market research, listening to what the viewers think about us as a brand and the content we're offering. So in terms of the look, it was, what are we about? We're bold, right? We're about telling you the whole story. We're about going far and beyond, because you're going to be on your phone seeing updates and all, but there's the context and the depth of storytelling that we embark on. So taking in all of these things that define us as a platform, as a channel, is what largely went into first the colors that you saw, the gray, the red, and also modern, you know. I think the old KTN News was rather eco too, right? So now you have even this slight curve you note on our logo now speaks to agility. You know, we'll move with the story. Wherever it goes, we will be there. So lots of hands on the deck across the group to bring that day to pass. And it was quite, I was like, wow, this is happening. You know, it's actually happening. And here we are.
Coming to fruition. But beyond the look,
Yeah.
what's the promise?
The promise, as I mentioned, we listened. We have done several market research surveys just to listen to the customer. And before, the feedback we'd received is that the typical viewer for KTN News is male, 35 plus, so too serious content, too hard, if you like. And so to diversify that then became the task. How do we meet people at their point of need? So is there content that will appeal to women, to the youth? Also entertainment news. So what we have introduced is this different offerings, just so that when you come to KTN News, there is something for you. There's something that you can relate to, that speaks to you, and that is able to impact your life in one way or the other. So I think the biggest thing across the shows that we have introduced is diversifying our content. Yeah.
Specific to election coverage, what plans are there? What have you done?
Well, we don't want to give competition our plans, but I think Kivumbi 2022 is definitely a fast mover for us. We made a decision early on, you remember on the 9th of August, exactly a year to the election, to own that space and to be very deliberate about setting the agenda and discussing issues around the election, around governance. And you're now part of that show. So
Yeah, I was watching the show on
and you saw
Monday.
yourself on Monday.
I saw there was a new person who was on the show at 8 p.m.
Exactly. So I think that was early on, just to speak to, as a news organization and realizing the importance and significance of the 2022 election. There's a lot to be able to speak to canvas, and not just your typical batok of Nanindi atashinda, people coming and having those kind of conversations. We have been deliberate, again, taking that effort to go into research, have data, so that we are putting into context and bring all of this perspective to our viewers to understand the various issues we discuss on the show. So yeah, that's definitely one of the areas, and we'll be going around the country, but of course more conversations happening behind the scenes around how we will cover this very consequential election. It's a transition one, it's big, it's major. So yes, there are plans around how we'll cover this.
Many argue that we're going into a season that's probably one of the more politically charged times that the country has been in the last 15 or so years. And so then, of course, then with all of this, then there's a huge responsibility that rests on the shoulders of media to make sure that, one, the truth is being told, that the underbelly of the story is being given. How do you see that playing out when there's so much happening at the same time, to make sure that, delivering what is true and factual and in a manner that Kenyans will then understand exactly what is happening?
And that's a huge task, to be able to rise above the noise, because political class, it's all about getting people to their side. And sometimes it's at whatever cost, right? And so the responsibility then upon us as the media, and you talk about fact checking, which was what even our hashtag on launch day was, is that promise to our viewers that we will make and take great care, and emphasis will be on fact checking. So if you come and say, you're going to give us apples every day once you're elected, how feasible is that? And speak to people who then would have this kind of understanding of what it takes. How long do apples take to grow? And, what kind of apples? Are they green? Are they red? Are they good for our health? So that kind of just looking at what are these people saying. But I think more importantly, a process we had been part of as a group, this media coverage of elections and creating and reviewing actually of those guidelines, just speaking to the kind of terrain and season we are going into right now. Because one of the things that emerged, especially for us as stakeholders, as media players, is the compromise. And call them brown envelopes. Here they're blue, they're red. And it was interesting sitting through those review sessions, and the political class and the politicians who came to actually, submit and present to the team, we're talking about how it's the order of the day. It's a thing that happens just so that you get whatever you want covered the way you want it to be covered. And so I think there are very many sort of like red flags along this path for us as coverage. And so as a team, we must then be deliberate about the kind of policies and be very clear about that which we want to cover and how we want to cover in a way that gets us that credibility from our viewers, because people will see through many things, right? You'll have somebody on the show just talking about whatever it is they're going to do, but are we doing real interrogation, or are we just giving free platforms for people to come and propagate whatever it is they hope to?
Talking of the how, the thing that the media is consistently accused of, and we hear it, we read it, we air it, we talk about it here, is that whatever political wave, whatever political activities we fuel it. We, the media, it's the accusation that we fuel it. We give it air. We give it breathing space. And the accusation isn't just that we are reporting it, but that we lean on one side. The accusation was loudest during the BBI. And they said, it is you in the media who keeps giving this BBI all the coverage.
Yeah.
See, little detail, it's our job to do that. It's our job. But the real accusation was we are influencing what we think is important, or we are getting the public to take as important something that we are giving prominence. Now, that was the accusation.
Yeah.
Now, we are getting to that period where the elections are not a story of the future, they are with us.
They're here. Yeah.
Yes. How are we? How are you?
How am I, Sophia Wanuna?
Yes. And the docket that you hold and the people you work with and your team. How are we going to ensure that we put our foot in the right place and not in our mouths, and that we actually present the balanced view that we claim we are actually going to present?
Yeah. It's interesting you bring in the word balance. And it's one of those, especially with such an election, that the question then becomes sometimes in meetings and when we're having debates around how we're going to cover a particular story is, okay, so CT has gotten 2 minutes on the bulletin. Does it then automatically mean Eric gets 2 minutes?
Eric usually is good with 30 seconds. But
30 seconds. So there's constantly all of this balancing act, because at the end of the day, you find, for instance, like in the US, some media houses will take a position. And sometimes even here, people have been accused to be leaning towards certain people or standpoints, policies. I think the most important thing is truth, one, right? That becomes the pursuit. When you're talking about if stories are out there and these positions are being taken by the players, what is it you're able to, at the end of the day, this person who is not in the throes of news gathering as we are, is able to get their story and they get to decide for themselves. We are not here to tell you this is a guy or this is not the guy. We're here to say this is the lay of the land. And that is why, for instance, you had, I forget his name, it skips my mind, but some of the candidates who are coming up in the presidential race being covered as well. What is it they're promising to do? Because, again, we are accused largely, we focus on one or two individuals. But there are other people who are saying they would want to, get in there, and they have these ideas of how this country should be run. So are there stories like BBI that are big and are covered? I disagree that we set that agenda. It was there, it was set. We were covering it best we could. And here we are, and BBI reggae has paused, and we'll see what happens going forward. But I think our responsibility to our viewers is, what is the lay of the land? Separating and being able to sift, this is what is true, this is not correct, this is not the position, and then you decide for yourself. So ideally, we should not be swaying either way. But something that is interesting and that keeps getting thrown at us, especially when it really gets down to the wire, is being patriotic. That as a media house, as journalists, are you patriotic? Are you going to cover this in a certain way, excuse me, as not to fuel or give a platform to those seeking to bring, kind of messaging that would lead to violence? And so it's a many red flags, careful balancing around this landscape and season.
You see, let's just go back into that, how we balance out who we are giving prominence in the news. I mean, it's a whole debate and it's a whole accusation. And every time we have more than two candidates, always candidate number 3, 4, 5, 6 will be saying, look, I've even sent out media invitations to the newsrooms. They don't come and cover me. I've sent out press releases. I've even sent out recorded material and said, I held a press conference. Yeah. Only 2 of you came, but I had somebody record it. And here is the footage. Please give me coverage. We still don't give them coverage. That's not fairness, is it?
Are they always given coverage? No.
Should they?
And that is at the end of the day, when in a newsroom you sit down to discuss what stories go on air,
yeah,
it's on the merit of the story. So for instance, if you come and you're going to tell me as Eric Latif from
This party, independent, running as an independent in the next year's election.
in the next
I want to
years,
fight corruption.
how are you going to fight corruption? We'll ask those questions,
Right.
right? And take you to task, because at the end of the day, whether it's this more notable person or this other guy,
Yeah.
Eric, coming into the picture,
Yeah.
ours is to be able to speak to whatever it is you're putting out there you're going to do, then put you to
I
task.
hear
on it.
you.
And
Now, the
ideally-
accusation is that you're going to give this other person who says, I'm going to finish corruption in the country in 2 years, you're giving them coverage
Yeah.
without having asked them, how are you going to finish corruption in 2 years?
And yeah.
And yet, this other person who says, I am going to have a conversation with the country and fight corruption, you have not even given them that coverage, so they can be asked by the people how.
They are being given coverage, Latif.
The prominence, though.
The prominence is a conversation that definitely needs to continue happening. However, I like how it is, Latif. At the end of the day, you have these people who have been around and have earned their stripes in this field. So
Yeah.
also the comparisons. There is the CT is CT, Sophia is Sophia. So there always will be a sense of measure that you will not, at the end of the day, when it comes to the weighing scale, there's a way it will tilt. So there is that as well, which is something you cannot run away from or ignore.
You know, Eric, what happens is why that accusation sometimes bears consideration is because we are accused of a bias because of a certain consistent position that people associate us with. And the only way you demystify or you debunk that is if you change. For instance,
Yeah.
if suddenly, let me think of a candidate that doesn't get very much coverage, Ruben Kigame, all right? So if instead of, say, today, IB fires a warning shot on 22 polls, okay? If alongside that, all right, we also had further down an unlikely presidential candidate, Ruben Kigame. See, page 1, front page, it's prominence.
Why
We-
unlikely?
No, I am giving an example because unlikely it's because one, prior to his candidature, unless you are a lover of gospel music, you may not have heard of the person. Okay? But unlikely in that he also someone who has a disability. Okay? So it's unlikely in that it's unusual. It's not something that happens every day. Now, if that was that, then we would have diverted because I understand our politics is about certain things, and there are candidates who are considered to be more candidates than others in that they've been in the scene longer, they seem to have more pull, they have big, all the things that we consider. Now, the unusual, if we also gave that, as Eric put it, prominence, then we will have moved away from what we are associated with ordinarily.
Yeah.
In combination to that, Sophia, sorry, just before you do that. So then who shapes it? Because who shapes then what will be prominent in the minds of people who are consuming this news and information?
True.
Is it that you're bouncing off of what people have said, that this is my candidate, this is my candidate? Or are we actually putting it in the minds of people as we present it to them, whether it's in the paper, on TV, whatever?
Yeah.
Are we presenting it to them and conditioning them to think that these are the likely individuals? Or are we feeding off what society is saying? Which one is it?
That's a good point, because we have a responsibility to be able to, again, tell the people there's more than these two guys who maybe you have known for a very long time. So, for instance, I think recently it was on Ken's show, News Line, and we're talking about the Kagame was on the show, Kaluyu.
Kigame.
I beg your
Kagame is the other guy
pardon.
who is already president.
Kigame.
Yes.
My apologies. And Kaluyu, who you may remember, vied also in the last election. And so to have these two individuals come on a prime slot to speak about what it is they intend to do, what their thoughts are about the country, the state of the nation, but more importantly, their approach in steering the country to the right direction, I think speaks to that intentionality, that's saying that, okay, there are these other people. So is it happening? Yes. Is it happening as much as it should? No. More could be done, should be done, because if we then only are driven by mob psyche, if you like, or just what is everybody's talking about, then we do a disservice to being able to cover and execute our mandate to the fullest extent. My take.
Somebody else would argue that it's not necessarily our responsibility. We decide what we consider newsworthy, and that's why we cover it. Now, there's a whole other debate about a public broadcaster who then can be told, because you're a public broadcaster and you're funded by taxpayers, you have an obligation to give equal coverage or whatever to all the candidates who come up. Now, there's that other argument that has been fronted out there. That, you know what, I'm running a media house. I am after financial gain.
Yes.
And I'm looking at, if I put this person in my headline,
It's not
how
gonna
many
sell.
people are going to buy this paper? If I lead with this story, how many people are going to watch this news? Because people are already conditioned in certain ways, in that they like you said, there are candidates who are more popular than others. There are candidates who've had who've been ahead in the game. There are those who are joining today and they're not as well known as those ones. So where do we place those considerations?
It's
Is
a
there
balancing
justification in
act.
saying, you know what, I'm a media house, I'm going to decide, CT, who are you? Forget about you. I'm going to give all the coverage to Sophia.
But that, I think, is a fair question. And if you are a media owner and it's a business, we're talking about balancing stories. You want to balance your books. We understand that. Okay? But the truth of the matter is this. One of the things that the media should also do, they should trailblaze. The things that people don't consider to be important, you can make them important.
Yeah.
The things that are genuinely important and require, and people don't particularly want to consider because they're a little sensitive, they're things you don't really want to touch and so forth. The things that the media has been responsible for and the good that has done across the globe, I mean, there's no end to those stories. However, since we're talking about Kenya and we're talking about our media, the thing that this media is known for, this group that we refer to as media, is their strong push for independence. The media in this country fights for that. That space that they have, they fight for it. Now, my argument is, having fought for that space and continually fighting for it, are we using that space to fight for those who don't have the space to fight? Those voices that need to be heard but are never heard.
Yeah.
The views that need to be heard but are never heard and never given a second chance. Now, that, in my opinion, is a perspective worth changing, because then you are genuinely doing two things. You are representing people in the real sense of the word, but you are also opening up that space so that the things that perhaps require discussion and are never discussed actually get discussed.
And I saw actually recently on, I think, one of the publications, you have the youth agenda and those who want to run for president.
Yep.
Again, I thought that was, it speaks to part of what you're touching and alluding to this morning, that who are these people? I never knew of these young guys talking about all of these dreams and aspirations they have for the country. So there is space for that, and to change the narrative from same old. Because again, some of the criticism we receive is every day it's so and so. You
Yep.
will find them constantly on the front page.
And when we do the youth, it's just tokenism. It's a once in a long time that you'll actually even remember. You remember this day that the headlines in the paper was about the youth.
Yes.
Because it's a one-off.
Exactly.
It's just so we can tick a box and say, you know what,
Tulifanya.
but we're giving everybody coverage. I mean, you don't remember we talked about the youth.
It shouldn't be that way.
It shouldn't be. There's a whole issue, and that's I agree with what CT is saying on the issue of our responsibility to amplify the voices that are never heard. Our responsibility to amplify the issue and set the agenda. If we want to set the agenda, for example, right now, 2 million Kenyans are waking up. They don't know whether they are going to have a meal today. All right? Have we followed up on that story? Are we asking these people that we're giving so much coverage and prominence, the secret card in Raila and Oka talks and all, are we asking these people, what do you want to do to make sure we don't have a repeat of 2 million Kenyans constantly having an acute food shortage or being food insecure throughout our year?
Yeah.
Or we just giving them the whole, they say 6,000 shillings, they say bottom up, they say, I'm going to finish.
Cut taxes.
Cut taxes. We just take it and place it, and then we ask them, but how are you going to cut taxes?
Yeah.
Because they've already set the agenda for us. They've said, I'm going to cut taxes. So our conversation with them is on what they have said, not on is it what somebody who is somewhere in Taru is thinking of, somewhere in Kilifi, somewhere in Garissa? Is this their concern today?
Yeah. And we shouldn't be conveyor belts, right? Because again, that's sometimes what happens. CT said, so I come in the evening and I say, today CT was at the Spice studio and he said he will buy Sophia tea. So we should, as your point you make, interrogate that. Does CT have capacity to buy me tea? Is tea what I want? So there is more definitely that can and should be done, and especially beyond what they say. So that it's not about them setting the agenda. Agenda setting for the media is a huge part that largely sometimes that beat is forgotten, or at least is not given as much prominence as it should. And I think going into this season, it has to come down to, when you listen, for instance, what the president was talking about in his speech, State of the Nation address, there are many things he will say regarding the kind of narrative he once shaped out there on his legacy. But then there is, okay, but does this and this add up? You know, if you say this and this happened and you have been able to achieve this, but this was the other side of that. We got this, but it got us into
This
this
is the
situation.
cost.
This is exactly the cost at which it came. This is the debt situation. This is what it means for the people coming into office. So you find all of this, for instance, presidential candidates will have these grand ideas, but they will come to a country that is dealing and grappling with certain issues, for instance, debt. So is any of these people telling us how they're going to deal with this? Because it's not a blank canvas they're coming to paint on. They are coming to a country that is what it is today and in coming days will be. So definitely it's a huge task, Eric. It's one of those we cannot afford to slack on.
You know, one of the things that is often sensitive in discussion and in thought in this country is what we call representation in the public space. And there's always, once in a while, some paper, some media house will have an expose, a discussion about one tribe. I like the word tribe. Or one community overrepresented at NSSF. Then they'll go to NHIF. Then they'll go to KPA. Yes, KEMSA. Now, they will even provide you with statistics and give you figures. And they talk about representation. Like there's one article that appeared in the Business Daily today about 35% of the jobs in KPA coming from the Mijikenda. Okay? And yet they argue that in the article that, well, according to the 2019 census, the Mijikenda comprise only 5% of the population of Kenya. So if you're looking at representation from the Kenyan perspective, okay, remember when we had a senator who belonged to the Ogiek community who passed away, right? And they said, hey, folks, we are a minority community. We expect that if one of us has gone to meet his maker, we should have a replacement. You see that argument? Now, whenever we have these sensitive issues, because they are sensitive, and the thing that is not being said, that there are some communities that dominate everything. That's what is actually being said when we talk about representation. Now, it's been said, we need to interrogate it and say, okay, when you say overrepresented, what do you mean? How does it work? Let that discussion be a fully fledged discussion so that the very things you don't particularly want to talk about, you talk about. Throw in history into it as well so that people understand how this came about. And then talk about affirmative action, something someone may not particularly want to hear. All right? If you have a coffee factory, I'm giving just an example, in Nyeri, all right? And you're told 35% of the employees of this coffee factory that is actually a national institution is people from Nyeri. In my mind, I would say, yeah, it's in Nyeri, isn't it?
Only 35.
Only 30. I see them. They grow. They grow coffee. So I would have thought 60. I'm telling you what I would think. But if you're looking at the way our constitution is and the way people think now, the only way our people get to understand some of these things is if we provide them with a platform where the discussion is actually robust. And the word balance comes to mind. It's balance. So you're saying, yes, this is huge, but consider this and this and this. What we tend to do is just report it, and then, as you say, you will leave it to them to figure out. Now, I'm already biased in my thinking. If you leave it to me without challenging my thought process, I'm just going to continue with my thinking. And how will that help?
Just confirming the bias.
Yes, exactly. And yet that bias may be completely misinformed.
True.
Sophia, another responsibility that then again is put on the shoulders of media is saying that, all right, to be the one that raises issues again for those those groups, communities of people who do not have a platform to raise them. Again, going into a period, in the period that we currently are in, and then hopefully choosing a leader at different levels next year. So here, there's a platform to continually bring out issues that may not necessarily be covered by politicians, would-be leaders themselves. It's a hard job, and we can't run away from that. There are many issues that pop up. Following the story and bringing out those, how then can it be done? Because a lot of times, again, one of the things we're accused of is raising an issue today, and that's it. We forget about it because something else has come up, which then needs to be visited. But we do find that when issues are covered consistently and interrogated well over time, a lot of times we find solutions to those issues. Those in certain positions bow to public pressure because there's a lot of highlight on it. How easy or difficult, just for us to understand, is it to remain on those issues when there's all these other things happening that need to be covered?
Yeah, we're inundated by news. There's always something happening, constantly. And that is why actually a big part of what we now have as KTN News, for instance, even in our what we call lower thirds, and that's the IDs you see scrolling down there, is that, for instance, you'll be having a conversation about drought. So that's the conversation. But then you have these flashing top stories of whatever other stories that are happening. And that, for me, speaks to the kind of path we have to tread, that you have to stay on topic, but still there's all of this. Of course, you're keeping your viewers informed on what's happening, but there's an agenda. There is an issue that you hold on to and do not let go. Even as I tell you this other news, I am not losing sight of, for instance, in this occasion, I am delivering, whether it's a story or it's an interview or interrogating a particular issue. But I think a big part of it also is going to the people in the regions. Because we are based here, all of the media houses, headquarters are in Nairobi. Sometimes we forget that there's life outside the capital city. And so being deliberate with our bureaus that we have across the country, and even in coverage of the election particularly, and going to speak to those people, having that national conversation somewhere in Bungoma, somewhere in Kilifi, different parts of the country, so that first it's everybody is involved, that there's more than Nairobi and so debating around whatever office. So I think being able to take the story around the country and interrogate the issues there, speak to the people from those regions. When you have those town hall sessions where you have people, Mwananchi actually come and speak to, and we have that in Kivumbi, that you actually realize that there's a place for people to speak themselves, not constantly saying experts are going to come and analyze, so-called experts sometimes, but just having Mwananchi, to the point Situ was making, just say the things that sometimes are uncomfortable or we do not want to confront just because they don't come across as we would want them to. So it's a hard task, but it's one that is not, is it insurmountable? It can be done. And we must then focus on getting that whole story told.
On getting out there.
Yeah.
The other big one is the issue of patriotism. So 2007, elections happened. The media is covering the election with all the what words can you use around that election of 2007, right? So, and the media is out there just telling the story as it's unfolding. And when we got to 2013, there was a lot of pressure on politicians, tone down your rhetoric, pressure on the media, tone down your coverage, be more deliberate in censoring the amount of information that you are actually publishing out there. And at the end of that election, there was also now this other whole conversation that the media has been compromised in how it covered the 2013 election. That we were too soft. We were not bringing out the main issues that came out. That the side that came out disgruntled out of that election was feeling, but the media was basically just regurgitating what the winner has been saying and what the winner has gone with. You have not given us our own fair share coverage. Now, how do we balance this? Like now we're talking about it. We are going into an election. It's like you used all those words to describe it. It's a transition election. We are already seeing the kind of heat being raised by the campaigns. At what point do we sit back and decide, okay, so what this person is saying, I'm not going to give it coverage. What this other person is saying, I'm not going to give them coverage. We have decided that we're going to be, picking live feeds and broadcasting stuff from out there, live political rallies. At what point do we balance between this thing called patriotism and the need for people to know what's happening.
The need for people to know what's happening. First of all, this election, how different it's going to be. You're finding that these politicians are not relying on us, the media, to cover them or to tell the story out there. They're live, right, on their
Yep.
pages. And so there's that part where they are getting straight to a big part of the population. But when it comes to us and our responsibility, just because we are talking about balance does not mean there is that, again, to the word responsibility, that if, for instance, it's hate speech or you're going to say certain things that will invoke, whether it is violence, you name it, there's a responsibility for us then to say at this point, this is where the line is drawn. There are certain things we're not going to broadcast because then at the point you give a platform for these things to happen, you are then part of the problem. Live coverage is always that, and various media houses, whether it's introducing this it's a delay on the live link so that you're able to monitor and see. There are certain characters you'll be like, so and so you can never take them live because you don't know what they're going to say.
Yeah.
But it's that very slippery slope sometimes, especially on live coverage. But I think at the end of the day, it is you want information out there for the public to understand and know, but also realize it's not just some kujeni, come one, come all, and just do as you wish. There have to be standards which are outlined in the guidelines regarding those lines that should not be crossed. NCIC will be the first to jump in there and say, you are our partners to help us, that this cohesion we so seek to build, you are patriotic to the extent that if you're just going to allow somebody to say certain things and the next thing there are stones being thrown someplace, where is your...
That's irresponsible.
Kabisa.
It's a difficult thing
Yeah.
to provide what we call a level playing field.
Very true.
Because on the one hand, you're talking about seasoned politicians who've been at this thing for decades. There are those who fewer decades. Then there are those just a couple of years. There are those even a couple of months.
In
Weeks. Now, what then do we consider level playing field? Because are we going to use as a benchmark the decades? Are we going to use a benchmark what it is you've done in the space that you've been involved in and that particular time as your benchmark? If you are 30 years old, we can't expect you to do what a 60-year-old has done. You need to live to be 60 for that benchmark to work.
Yeah.
So how do we, as the media, bring this into being so that we actually focus and say, it is true. So and so in the time that they've been in politics, this is what they've done. And this is the history. And it's a beautiful history. But let's compare the time at which they started their politics and what they were facing and what they were doing. And then let's look at this other person who's been at this thing for a couple of years. Then we're able to now give a better comparison.
Yeah.
Because the baggage of history will work against this other person here. All right? Now, we in the media, the level playing field, it's something we can do.
You see, look at like a typical news day like today. So this guy who's been in the politics in the trenches 30 years, today they have several engagements, political ones. They're going out there to sell their promise. This is what I intend to do. This other guy has been there 2 weeks. He's at home today. So we go seek him out in his house and say, hey, you are running for president. You need to tell us something so that there's this balance. At the end of the day, the story takes its course as well. There is that part to it. That the flip side also is true. This guy could have been there 30 years, but on this day, as we are agreeing, whatever stories we are covering for the day, is doing nothing. And so on that day, there's not going to be a story because we're not going to go seek you out just based on the longevity of your period in politics. Then this 2 weeks person is out there today in the marketplace doing all of these things, selling his agenda. That will be covered. So the story also just does render itself to being covered to the extent of the effort of the individual. So it's two ways.
I agree completely.
Yeah.
You know why I'm saying this? I'm looking at the narrative that we have had to grapple with for a long time about devolution and how we devolve corruption. Okay? A wonderful thing, this devolution.
Yeah.
Now, the flip side of it and what? So the question is, did we actually devolve corruption Or did we now bring it home to the point where we actually say, folks, this thing is an international issue.
It's local.
And it involves everybody in the country.
Yeah.
So you can't focus and say, if you want to understand it, look at where you come from and look at how they're going about it.
Yeah.
It's a story. Now, how that has hampered or how that has affected these huge plans we have for development, see, it's a whole new story. Because when you think of the billions that have been, it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
Me, I've had issues with the billion. How many zeros is it again?
Ask Ndu.
Yes.
Ndu is the only one who's handled $1 billion here.
Yes. 9.
Yeah.
Yes. Man.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.